Metallica concert.
What do you mean?
It was easier to be soulful at the Challenger Deep than it was in a freaking rocket.
I see.
It's just loud and it's bright and you're in 0G. It's just like
sensory overload.
Total sensory overload, but amazing,
That's so cool.
Actually, I've never made that analogy before. Going up into space is like going to a Metallica concert. Going to the bottom of the ocean is like listening to a candlelit quartet.
Huh.
And then mountain climbing.
What is Everest like?
Yeah, Everest is like going to a Smash concert where you're in the pit.
Yeah.
You're just getting thrown around and you don't know what's going to happen.
You're sick and you might get a concussion.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't know what's going on. Yeah.
Okay, back to the Battle of Samar and the wrecks. And what do you think the value of marine archaeology is? I mean, archaeology has value, right? I mean, people are, it teaches us about the past.
Yep.
But in these instances where we know the past, and also sort of dovetailing into this, aren't some of these wrecks being salvaged?
Well, the shallow wrecks are being salvaged, especially the ones like in less than 100 meters, because the steel that was used to construct them was used before atomic explosions. So the steel in the water has never been contaminated by radiation. So it's very useful for scientific instrument calibration. So literally they're going down to cut up this metal that in some respects is virgin from a nuclear standpoint, and they use it for scientific instruments. So it's very valuable. Now, the wrecks that I went to, no one's going to go down there. They're just too bloody deep. But there is that concern about salvaging wrecks in shallow water, and they are disappearing, especially in the Pacific. But I think marine archaeology is very important because apart from the first dives I did to the Challenger Deep, by far the most views on YouTube have been of the wreck dives because people are interested in history. Mm-hmm. And it gives you a chance to tell the story and see these iconic wrecks. And because these were so deep, they looked just like they looked when they were on the surface when they went down. There was like no contamination of them. And I think archaeology is important because it allows you to tell the stories. It allows people to get interested in history. And you can find maybe some very unusual things. I would love to go dive some ancient wrecks, like from the Roman era. Who knows what you'll find there? And if you study history, as again, I do a lot, being able to contribute to the historical record helps you understand what happened. Just finding coins with certain emperors or usurpers printed on them in Britain in a certain year, carbon dated, can tell you whether or not it was going well or not, for that usurper.
Right.
Little details that you wouldn't think are important can be very important. A vase with a certain type of clay or a painting on it, who knows? And that's why I think it's important to do archaeology. So there's so many things that are cool about the ocean. There's marine biology, there's marine geology, there's climatology, there's archaeology. It's just like on land, but it's even more vast and completely unexplored. It's just hard to do.
Yeah. I did archaeology many years ago in Nepal.
Bullwhip and Stetson and all that.
Yeah, bandana. In Mustang, Nepal, which is sort of a Grand Canyon north of the Himalayas, desert. It's in the rain shadow.
Okay.
And there's a civilization there many thousands of years ago that seemed to be perched at the most natural path between India and China. And there's caves dug into cliff sides, and we climbed up into these caves, and it became a National Geographic magazine article and documentary film. But it struck me in those experiences, I learned, because we found things. We found beads, we found human remains and cave ossuaries. Scientists from Oxford and other places did studies on the teeth and learned a lot about these people, what their diet was, where they came from. And there was so little information that fed the narrative of the Silk Road. So what we found upended the narrative of the Silk Road. We basically found that there was a whole other path.
Right.
And just these pieces of archaeological data completely rewrote the story. There's not that much information that we are basing all these stories on.
Right.
There's some, but then sometimes we find new things and they change. The stories change.
And we've talked a lot about history in our conversation here, but it is important if you want to understand what could happen or what will probably happen. History is a great guide. It also helps you understand where you are in the present. Those who don't study the past have no history. It's the old saw, but it's true. And another great quote that I recently heard was the fact that history actually is not static. it keeps changing because we keep getting new information, and that history at its essence is simply a collection of lies commonly agreed upon.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The winners write history.
Correct. And there's a lot of missing gaps, and we just fill them in. And if it's in a book and it's been written, of course it's true, until you find out it's not. And I can speak from direct experience. One of the most enlightening things and unusual things about my deep ocean explorations was watching the reporting on it. And even a couple of books have now come out with a lot of details about the expedition. In general, they're right, but I was there and details are wrong. And yet people who read it will assume it's correct.
Right.
There are things that, a great example was, it was reported that I saw candy wrappers at the bottom of Challenger Deep by the BBC.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, I
did
saw
not.
That. You did not.
It was injected by someone in PR that I saw. They confused it with something that happened in a different trench. I never saw candy wrappers at Challenger. And no matter how many times I tell people that, it is officially part of the historical record that I did because it was on the BBC and it was re-reported.
Yeah, it was a major story. Correct. It was a global story.
I did find some human contamination, and I refer to it that way because people say, oh, it's plastic. I think it was plastic, but I don't know because I didn't collect it and it kind of looked like it and then it blew away. But that whole encounter with trash at the bottom of the Challenger Deep has been completely misreported.
There's such an agenda within institutional news.
And there isn't in history?
Well, yeah, fair, touche. Yeah.
There's always an angle, whether it's, conscious or not.
Yeah.
And that was the unfortunate thing when we did our first multiple dives to the bottom of Challenger Deep. We thought it'd be a big story about the technology. Wow.
Right.
They dove multiple dives to Challenger and now we can go anywhere in the seafloor. No, 95% of the coverage was about the garbage at the bottom of Challenger Deep because it fit the we're killing the ocean, climate change, all that other issues. It wasn't even about climate change. It was about garbage in the ocean. And we're like going, really?
Yeah.
That's the big story?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Anthropocene narrative is the media narrative.
Right.
Or one of the main media narratives. Yeah.
And it certainly was on certain publications. And I learned that. And so I become much more suspicious and skeptical of what I read now because after being so directly involved in something that was widely reported, it really opened my eyes about how often inaccurate it is.
It's hard to see that with respect to the news for most people because they don't have necessarily, I listen to a lot of podcasts. This happens often. Anybody who becomes the news or their life is a focal point, express similar views to what you're expressing.
The other hilarious thing for me was Josh Young, who wrote the book Expedition Deep Ocean, which chronicled what we did on the 5Ds expedition. He said it was the most difficult book he's ever written because he had no idea how it was going to end. And that's how I felt during it. They were filming and all this. When people read about it now, it's all, well, that's what happened. And of course, Victor survived. And of course, it all worked out.
But you didn't know.
When you were doing it, you sure as hell didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And therefore, that completely changes your perspective on it.
Right.
And maybe